This is Chris Evans from Architecting IT, and I'm here today with Matt Watts, Chief Evangelist at NetApp. How are you doing, Matt?
I'm doing very well, Chris. Good to be able to talk to you today.
So let's talk about supply chain. Now, it's very interesting to see that in the last couple of years, due to the pandemic and other issues, we've had a real issue with chip supply, and that's affected everybody across the industry. It's not just technology suppliers like NetApp or any of the others. It's affected the motor industry, and to the extent that we're seeing certain vendors pulling features on their cars even as they roll them out. So inevitably, every few years we see some sort of supply chain issue. We had one last year with NAND, where we saw NAND flash got contaminated, and we've had a real constriction of supply, and that probably will push costs up. 10 years ago, we saw the floods in Thailand, where we saw a shortage on hard drives. So supply chain is always a problem that we have to manage. The question is, how do we do it in a hybrid world? And I think, Matt, when you've got the choice to choose whether you deploy on premises or in the cloud, you've got the ability there to mitigate some of those supply chain issues.
So exactly that, and I think there's so many reasons why people go to the cloud, and I think the history that you've just shared around kind of supply chain. I think that's just an indication of what we're going to see in the future. There are just more and more and more companies all fighting over the same components, and the minute we see constraints in supply, it affects everybody. So I think going forward, all companies are going to have to be thinking about, when we're looking to deploy a new project, what are the timeframes going to be? What is the risk to the project of there being some other supply chain constraint or supply chain issue? And that's why I think, again, another reason why people will start to consider the cloud more and more and more, because the cloud gives you that, I don't want to say limitless, but in terms of most organization, it would appear to be an almost limitless, instantaneous pool of resource that they can draw from. So, supply chain will be part of people's considerations. People will still need on-premises technology, but I think increasingly people are going to look to the cloud and say, actually, is the cloud a way of us just removing the supply chain as one of those variables that is often something that's out of our control?
Yeah, I know that when I was an end user, when I was an administrator, we would work a lot with the business. We'd develop plans around how we were going to use storage to deliver to new projects that were coming along. And as a result, when you knew there's going to be a constraint or there was going to be issues, well, you did the most obvious thing, you overbought. So you end up buying more technology, so you've got some in reserve, and then you've spent more money, and you've got technology you're not using, sitting on the floor, not being consumed. And funny enough, there's a lot of times when the business wouldn't actually project properly. They'd either say, we don't need it, or they'd come to us and say, we need it tomorrow. Now, in those days, if I could have said, well, let's build a hybrid solution here that says, sometimes you'll take on-prem, sometimes you'll take stuff from the cloud, I'd have been in a much stronger position to manage and mitigate some of those risks. And I think now, when we look at the challenges around supply chain, actually, if you are in that position where you think that your vendor might say, well, I can't guarantee I can deliver, in the timescales promised, there's a real opportunity here to say, if I've developed a cloud strategy that involves hybrid and public cloud, I can actually just use that. And that's my alternative, and that's my mitigation strategy.
Yeah, and I completely agree, Chris. And I think where we are at the moment is, I think all companies, if you are currently impacted by supply chain constraints, hopefully we'll get through that, and things will start to ease up again. But if you are currently impacted, isn't now maybe the chance to say, actually, let's look at the cloud. Let's take that variable out, which is affecting lead times and delivery times, and let's look at, could we deploy this application into the cloud? And I think from NetApp's point of view, it all goes back to, why did we make ONTAP available inside the cloud providers? For many, many different reasons. But I think now it also is one of those, the benefits of it is, if you need ONTAP, then do you need it on premises where you could be affected by current or future supply chain constraints, or do you need it in the cloud where you take that variable out?
Yeah, I think of it as time to value. So, and this, which is a terrible expression in some respects. It sounds like a real marketing term, but actually, I think it really is a genuine expression of where we are. So, for example, if I'm deploying technology on premises, if I have to go out and buy my lead times tend to be measured in days and weeks. If I want to consume storage that's in the cloud, my lead time is minutes. So now, I know I can just go and I grab a resource from the cloud, deploy it, and I'm going. And it's a combination of the two, and whichever works best for you. But there is a real time to value here that you can actually build into your design and everything else that you're doing in terms of how you deploy storage in your environment. So I really think we shouldn't think of the supply chain here as an issue. We should just think of it as part of the overall deployment of technology. And as you said, it's a choice. It becomes down to the best way you want to deliver your technology for you.
And I think to add one final point to what you've just said, Chris, the wonderful thing about cloud is when you don't need it anymore, you can give it back.
Yes,
And that if you're planning for on premises, you're buying for the peaks, you're buying for the longer term. Whereas in the cloud, you're buying for what you need now. And then when you don't need it anymore, you can release it. So, I think that's that other real value. It's the time to value and the time to be able to release costs when you finish a project or you finish doing something that you've been working on.
yeah, absolutely.